I woke to the smell of cinnamon and the sound of someone dragging furniture across my ceiling. That's how you know you're sleeping underground. Life scuffs along right over your head. I sat up and reached for my glasses. On my pillow lay a neat square of paper, folded twice and taped with a gold star. Linda always liked stickers. When she was 8, her spelling tests looked like fireworks. Dad, the note read in her looping script, "Don't be mad, the grandkids are staying a full week. We made your room into a bunk bed wonderland. Your things are safe in the basement guest area for the holidays. XOL." I stared at the words "your room." We'd built that room 29 years ago when Martha wanted a place where the morning sun could find her face. I could still see her tracing the window with a paintbrush, lip between her teeth, laughing at the way the light hit her wedding ring. I folded the note once more and slipped it into the pocket of my flannel. My back ached the way a back does at 68. Not a complaint, just a report. I shuffled upstairs. The hall smelled like cinnamon and new plastic. Garlands everywhere. My old door was open. The bed was gone. In its place, 2 bright bunk beds, a string of battery lights, a felt banner that said Cousins HQ. My dresser had vanished. In the corner sat a clear bin labeled Dad's Stuff. My shaving kit balanced on top like a crown on a cardboard king. "Grandpa," Daisy launched at me with 6-year-old enthusiasm. "We made a fort. Can you sleep under the bottom bunk?" "Under?" I smiled. I used to be able to crawl, but these knees charge double now. Linda breezed in, cheeks pink, hair up the way she wore it when she needed everyone to believe this was fun. "Dad, you're up. Isn't it cute? We needed more beds. The basement guest area is cozy. Mark hung those lights you like." From the kitchen, Mark called, "Hey Chief, how's the lower level treating you? We set you up with," he checked his phone, "fast Wi-Fi and a space heater. It's like a man cave." Cave sounded about right. I looked at the bunk beds. The girls had lined up their stuffed animals like an audience. Martha would have loved that. She would have loved the noise and the glitter glue and the way the house felt full. She would also have said, privately, "We don't move people out of their rooms." "Looks nice," I said. "Where's my dresser?" "In the garage for now," Linda said, too quickly. "We didn't want the kids messing with your razors. You know how they are." I nodded. I did know how kids were. I also knew how daughters were when they wanted something done and wanted it done yesterday. "Coffee?" Linda asked, already moving. "Black," I said, already following. Downstairs, the guest area did look tidy. A folding table, a rug with a geometric pattern, a new lamp. Someone had placed my winter coat on a plastic chair like a hotel robe laid out for a honeymooner. On the folding table lay a printed sheet, "Holiday House Rules." The title had holly leaves. I ran a finger down the list. Shower times, 6:20 a.m. or after 9 p.m. Kitchen closed 1:04 p.m. for prep. Thermostat locked at 66 degrees Fahrenheit, blanket basket provided. Quiet hours, grandpa naps welcome in the basement. Please stay out of the way during hosting. Please stay out of the way. I heard Martha's voice as clear as a bell. We don't do that to people with names. I folded the sheet and put it with the pillow note. My father used to say, "Keep your paper straight and your head will follow." He worked the docks until the union pension nudged him into an armchair. He died with neat envelopes and a paid-off Buick. Not a bad way to go. "Dad," Linda stood at the top of the stairs. "We've got carolers and cocoa at 6. Can you?" She made a little circle in the air. "Keep the TV low. We'll want the upstairs nice." Of course, I said. Hey, where'd Mark put the house key? What key? The brass one. Original. The one that sticks when you don't jiggle it. Oh, we've got the app now. She held up her phone. Watch. Beep. The front door thunked. Smart lock. Mark installed it. It's so convenient. Cheap and fast, I murmured. What? Sounds convenient, I said louder. She was already gone, her voice trailing toward the kitchen. Mark, Dad loves the lock. I poured my coffee and pressed my palm against the basement wall. Cold bled through the drywall like a quiet leak. Fine for a storage room, not for a man's bed. I sipped. The cinnamon smelled like December. The note in my pocket felt like January. Upstairs, someone turned on the speaker. Sinatra promised a white Christmas. I pictured Martha's hand on my sleeve, tugging me toward the tree. Later she would whisper, "We'll sneak the ribbon onto the neighbor's porch." That's the thing about disrespect. It's loud like a marching band and soft like tape on a pillow. You hear both. You feel both. You remember everything. I finished the coffee and set the mug in the sink. I rinsed it, dried it, and put it back exactly where Linda liked them now. 3 rows from the left handle at 4 o'clock. You can learn new systems at any age. It's survival. Then I went down to the guest area, opened the plastic bin with my name on it, and made an inventory. Phone, blood pressure pills, the old brass key still on my ring under the shiny fob Mark gave me last Father's Day. The deed to this house, folded into the envelope from the day Martha and I signed for it. People think time takes your strength. Sometimes it gives you back your paperwork. I set everything in a small canvas bag Martha had used for farmers' markets. On the side, in her careful script, eggs, dill, remember flowers. I laughed. I remember Mart. Upstairs Daisy shouted, "Grandpa, look." She barreled down the stairs with a string of paper snowflakes she'd cut. Crooked, glorious, generous snow. "I'll hang them by your bed," she said, lit between her teeth, the way her grandmother used to. "I'd like that," I said. I hung the snow. I made the basement bed. I smoothed the blanket from the basket provided. And then I sat, and I listened to Sinatra, to the furnace, to the little click the new lock made when the wind pressed on the door just so. It didn't click twice, not in the cold. I took out the rules and read them again. "Please stay out of the way." I folded the paper so only the words "please stay" showed. It looked almost polite, like a real invitation. "All right," I told the empty room. "We'll stay, on our terms." I put the brass key in my front pocket and patted it like a lucky stone. And I started to plan. The first morning in my holiday guest suite started with the sound of my son-in-law's voice coming through the floorboards, brisk and clipped, like a man narrating his own efficiency. Mark had that tone, the one he used when directing delivery guys, repair crews, and apparently his father-in-law. I'd just stepped out of the shower when I heard his footsteps on the basement stairs. He appeared in the doorway with a mug of coffee in one hand and his phone in the other. "Morning, Chief," he said, as if we were teammates at some corporate retreat. "Thought we'd go over the schedule for the week." He handed me a laminated sheet. I recognized Linda's handwriting at the bottom, but the bullet points had Mark's brand of precision. Showers 6 o'clock, 6:20 or after 9 p.m. kitchen closed, 1 o'clock, 4 p.m. for prep. Thermostat locked at 66 degrees Fahrenheit. Blankets provided. Noise, keep volume down during hosting hours. General, please stay out of the way when guests arrive. I read the list slowly, letting each restriction find its place in my mind. The words, "please stay out of the way," didn't sting so much as settle deep, like grit in a shoe. It wasn't the first time I'd felt like an afterthought in my own family, but it was the first time it had been printed, laminated, and handed to me before breakfast. "You'll thank me later," Mark said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Keeps things smooth. Everyone knows their role." "My role," I said evenly, "appears to be staying out of the way." He chuckled as if I'd made a joke. "Don't take it personal, Chief. It's just for the holidays. You know, so the house runs like a well-oiled machine." I nodded slowly. "Well, you've certainly got it oiled." When he left, I placed the laminated sheet next to the note Linda had left on my pillow. Both were small things, lightweight enough to carry, yet heavy enough to shift the way you see a person. Later, as I made my way upstairs for coffee, I noticed Mark fiddling with the front door. He tapped his phone, and the lock clicked open with a tinny sound. "New smart lock," he said proudly. "Got it on sale. Works like a charm. Just don't forget, no more brass key needed." I smiled politely, but in my pocket, my thumb rubbed over the familiar ridges of that old brass key. They didn't know I still had it, and I didn't feel like telling them. It was then I noticed something they didn't. When the wind shifted and the temperature dropped, the new lock didn't quite latch. A hairline gap, so slight you'd miss it if you weren't paying attention. I closed the door gently, heard the click once, and waited in the silence for the second click that never came. I didn't mention it. Not yet. Because if there's one thing a man learns after nearly 7 decades, it's that some problems solve themselves, if you're patient enough to let them. That evening, the wind shifted the way it often does in late December, a cold front sliding in from the north, sharpening the air until it felt like the sky itself could snap. I was in the basement, folding the blanket Linda had provided, when I heard the door upstairs rattle. Not slam, not creak, just rattle, the kind of sound a loose tooth makes before it falls out. Curious, I went up the steps quietly, avoiding the one that groaned near the top. Mark was in the kitchen, too busy setting timers on the oven to notice me. I stepped toward the front door and looked at the frame. There it was again, the slightest gap between the latch and the strike plate, no bigger than the edge of a fingernail. I nudged the door with 2 fingers, and it gave, not all the way, but enough to break the seal against the weather. Mark, still fiddling with the oven, called over his shoulder, "Careful with that door, Chief. It's sensitive." "Is that so?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Yeah, it's a smart lock, but the cold messes with it sometimes. No biggie. We'll just keep the heat running a little higher." I glanced at the thermostat on the wall. Locked. 66 degrees. Blankets provided. Linda bustled in, carrying a tray of cookies, her cheeks flushed from the oven heat. "Dad, close that door, will you? We can't have the house getting cold before company comes." I shut it, listening for the sound it should make. 1 click, then a second as the bolt settled home. The second never came. The flaw was real, and they either didn't notice or didn't care enough to fix it. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I checked again. I opened the door a crack, let the icy air brush my face, then closed it carefully. 1 click. No second. I pressed my palm against the frame. Cold air leaked in, carrying the faint smell of snow. Down in the basement, I sat at the folding table, took out the laminated rules, and laid them flat in front of me. My eyes landed on the last line. "Please stay out of the way." I smiled to myself. "I will," I murmured. "But when the time comes, I'll be exactly where I need to be." Because sometimes, the smallest weaknesses are the ones worth remembering, and the cold has a way of making them matter. The first real fight of the holidays didn't start with yelling. It started with a shiver. It was a few mornings after the guest area relocation, the kind of winter morning where the light filtering through the upstairs windows looked blue, not yellow. I could see my breath when I walked from the basement up into the kitchen, and not because I had been outside. Linda was already at the counter, pouring cereal into 3 bowls for the grandkids. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, and she wore one of those oversized sweaters she'd bought from a catalogue, the kind that promised cozy cabin comfort in big red letters. Even with the sweater, she had her shoulders hunched, and the kids had wrapped themselves in blankets like little burritos, spoons clinking against their bowls. "Morning, Dad," she said, trying for cheerful but not quite making it. "Hope the basement was warm enough." "Warm enough for a storage room," I said lightly, rubbing my hands together. "Not so much for a man's lungs." Before she could respond, Mark strode in, phone in hand as always, scrolling with his thumb while balancing a mug of coffee. He glanced at the thermostat on the wall and nodded to himself like a general inspecting his troops. "Perfect," he said. 66 degrees on the dot. That's the sweet spot. Efficient and comfortable, keeps the bills down and the air fresh. I raised an eyebrow. Fresh, maybe. Comfortable, that's debatable. Mark grinned without looking up from his phone. "Chief, you've got to think about the long game. A couple degrees lower over the whole season, and we save hundreds. That's smart living." "I've survived 68 winters," I said evenly, "and not one of them was made better by being cold in my own house." "It's not just about you," Mark replied, tapping the thermostat display. "We have guests coming. We don't want the place to feel stuffy." I looked around at the kids in their blankets, at Linda rubbing her hands together, at the frost building on the inside corner of the dining room window. "Yeah," I said slowly. "Real tropical in here." That earned me a pointed look from Linda, the kind that meant please don't start. I took the hint and poured myself some coffee, letting the steam curl into my face like a secret. The thing about thermostats, especially locked ones, is that they tell you more than just the temperature. They tell you who's in control. When I was younger, back when Martha and I had just bought this house, the thermostat was like a conversation between us. Some winters she'd keep it lower to save on oil, and I'd build a fire in the evenings. Other times, when she felt the cold in her bones, we'd nudge it higher without a word. It wasn't about numbers on a screen, it was about comfort, about looking after each other without needing to be asked. Now here I was, in the same house, watching my son-in-law treat it like a stock portfolio. After breakfast, I went back to the basement, wrapped myself in the blanket from the basket provided, and waited. I'd learned over the years that people show their hand when they think you've given up. Sure enough, later that afternoon, I came upstairs to find the grandkids playing in the living room. Daisy looked up at me with a little frown. "Grandpa, my toes are cold." "Mine too," her brother chimed in. Before I could say a word, Linda swooped in with another blanket. "Here you go, sweetie," she said, tucking it around Daisy. "Grandpa likes it cooler down here." That stopped me cold. "Is that so?" I asked. Linda gave me a quick apologetic glance but didn't answer. Mark, who had just come in from the garage, chuckled. "Well, Chief, you're from the old school. You like fresh air." I set my coffee on the table. "I like not seeing my breath indoors, Mark. There's a difference." He shrugged as if the point didn't matter. "It's fine. The blankets are there for a reason." I didn't argue. Instead, I made a note of the time, 3:17 p.m., and glanced at the thermostat again. Still locked at 66. I also noticed something else, the faint hum of the furnace struggling to keep up, the sound of effort without progress. And in my pocket, I felt the weight of that brass key. That night, when everyone was asleep, I padded upstairs in my socks. The moonlight from the window fell across the front door, highlighting the faint gap between the frame and the smart lock. I pressed my hand against the edge. Cold air slid through, the kind of sharp needling cold that creeps in unnoticed until it's everywhere. I let my hand rest there for a long moment, thinking about Martha, about the winters we'd weathered together, about how the warmth in this house had always been something we made for each other, not something rationed out like soup in a breadline. And I thought, not for the first time, that sometimes people needed a little reminder of what real comfort costs and what it's worth. Downstairs, I lay in bed under 2 blankets, listening to the wind press against the house and the lock clicking once but never twice. The cold was coming, and when it did, I'd be ready. The cold didn't bother me as much that night, but it wasn't because the temperature had changed. It was because my mind had shifted into a different gear, the one that clicks in when you realize something has moved past annoyance into disrespect. And disrespect, in my experience, is not something you argue with directly. It's something you answer in your own time, on your own terms. I'd been living in this house long enough to know its rhythms, the sound of the furnace kicking on in the early morning, the creak of the hallway floor when someone tiptoed past the kids' room, the little whistle the upstairs bathroom faucet made when it was turned on too fast. It had been my home before it was Linda and Mark's. Martha and I had paid every bill, painted every wall, fixed every leak with our own hands. Now, standing in the basement guest area, I looked around at my things packed into plastic bins like they were leftovers. Someone didn't have time to put away properly. My shaving kit sat on top of one bin, balanced so carelessly that the zipper had come open and my old razor was half hanging out. In another bin, I spotted the photo of Martha on the porch swing, the one where the late summer light hit her hair just right, making it look like it had a halo. I took a slow breath and started laying out what I would need, not what they thought I needed, what I knew I needed. My winter coat, heavy but worn in all the right places. My wool scarf, the one Martha knitted back when our nights were quieter and she'd work the yarn in her lap while we watched old movies. My gloves, the leather pair I'd had since my 40s, still supple because I'd kept them oiled. Next came the important papers. I reached into the bottom drawer of my old nightstand, now shoved against the far wall, and pulled out the folder labeled House. Inside, neatly stacked, were the property tax receipts, the insurance documents, and most importantly, the deed. My name was still printed there in black ink, the ink we'd signed in the lawyer's office all those years ago. Martha's signature right beside mine, the loops of her handwriting graceful and deliberate. Then came the brass key. I'd never given it up when Mark switched to the smart lock. It was more than a habit, it was a matter of principle. Keys have weight, real weight, in a way that apps never will. This one had been in my pocket through blizzards and summer storms, through nights when Martha and I came home from dancing, laughing so hard I could barely fit it into the lock. The grooves had worn smooth against my thumb over the years, and it fit in my palm like it belonged there. I placed it on the table with the coat, scarf, gloves, and deed. Beside it, I set my wallet, my reading glasses, my phone charger, and a small flashlight. You never know when you might need to see clearly in the dark, literally or otherwise. Finally, I added the canvas tote Martha used for the farmer's market. On the side, in her handwriting, it still read, "Eggs, dill, remember flowers." That bag had carried produce, books, and even the occasional bottle of wine on summer evenings. Tonight, it would carry something different, my independence. Once everything was laid out, I sat back in the chair and looked at it all. It didn't look like much, but I'd learned over the years that the most important things you own can usually be carried in one trip if you have to. The rest, the furniture, the decorations, the stuff people cling to, those are just props. Upstairs, I could hear the muffled sound of laughter, the kind people share when they're wrapped up in themselves and certain the rest of the world has accepted their rules. I imagined Linda in the kitchen with her friends, talking about the cute setup for Dad downstairs, about how he's so easygoing and doesn't mind, and maybe I didn't mind. Not in the way they thought. I didn't mind because I wasn't going to be here much longer. I took the laminated holiday house rules and folded them until the only words visible were, "Please stay." Then I folded it once more and tucked it into the tote, right on top of the deed. My father used to say, if you want to know where you stand, look at what you'd take with you if you had to leave in a hurry. I'd always thought he was talking about emergencies, but now I realized he meant moments like this, when you see the writing on the wall and decide you're not going to wait for someone else to decide your worth. I zipped the shaving kit, slid my papers inside the tote, and hung the coat over the back of the chair. Everything in one place. Ready. It wasn't time yet, but it would be. And when it was, I'd walk out the door without raising my voice, without slamming anything shut, just the way they'd moved me out of my room, quietly. And the cold, I thought with a faint smile, would take care of the rest. It happened 3 days before Christmas, and like most turning points in life, it was something small. Small enough that someone else might have shrugged it off. But I've learned that small things aren't always harmless. They can be the thread that finally unravels the whole cloth. That morning I'd been up early, sipping coffee at the basement folding table, when I heard voices upstairs. Linda was on the phone, speaking in that bright, polite tone she used when she wanted people to think everything was perfect. "Oh yes, Dad's fine down there," she was saying. "It's actually better for him. Less noise, you know. And he's got his own space. He's not in the way." The words weren't cruel, but they were dismissive. Dismissive in the way you might talk about a piece of furniture you'd moved to make room for something new. I didn't stomp upstairs to correct her. I didn't even frown. I just folded the newspaper, set it on the table, and took another sip of coffee. People will always tell you who they are if you let them talk long enough. Later that afternoon, I was in the living room with the grandkids. Daisy was showing me a glitter-covered ornament she'd made, and her brother was trying to hook a candy cane on my ear when Mark walked in holding a large cardboard box. "Hey, Chief," he said, setting it down on the coffee table. "Mind helping me move a few things to the garage?" "Sure," I said, because that's the kind of answer that buys you time. He pulled the flaps open, and I saw it immediately, the framed photo of Martha and me from our 25th anniversary, the one that had sat on the mantel for decades. It had been replaced this year by some trendy abstract sculpture Linda picked up at a holiday craft fair. Beside the photo were other little mementos: a seashell from the beach trip when Linda was 12, a silver clock Martha's sister had given us, a faded book of Christmas carols we used to sing from. "Where's all this going?" I asked, my voice even. "Garage for now," Mark said without looking up. "We need the mantel space for the Christmas village display. You know, for the party photos." I looked at the photo of Martha, her eyes bright, her smile real, her hand resting on mine. She loved the holidays, not for the decorations or the photos, but for the feeling of the house being alive with people who cared about one another. "She'd have liked the village," I said quietly. though what I meant was she wouldn't have liked being boxed up for it. Mark was already talking about the guest list, rattling off names I barely recognized. "It's going to be great, Chief. Real showstopper stuff. We'll get some shots by the fireplace for the family newsletter." I placed the photo back in the box, gently, as if the glass could break from my touch. "Careful with that," I said. "It's worth more than all the plastic snow you can buy." He laughed like I'd made a joke. "Don't worry, Chief. It's safe in the box." Safe in the box. That was the moment. I carried the box to the garage with him, but I didn't put it on the shelf where he pointed. Instead, I set it by the door, right next to where my coat would be hanging later that night. I noticed the cold creeping in from the edge of the smart lock on the side door, that same faint draft I'd been tracking all week. Back downstairs, I looked at the small pile of my things I'd been keeping ready. The coat, the tote, the brass key, the papers. Now I added the anniversary photo to the stack, sliding it into a reusable grocery bag and wrapping it in one of the blankets they'd provided for my comfort. People think a straw breaking the camel's back has to be something dramatic. A shouting match, a slammed door, a betrayal shouted in public. But sometimes it's just the sight of someone you love being treated like an afterthought, even if that someone has been gone for years. When I lost Martha, I promised myself I'd never let her memory be pushed aside like it didn't matter. That promise meant more to me than comfort, more than convenience, more than pretending to get along for the sake of a smooth holiday. That night, while the house was quiet, I stood at the front door with my coat zipped and the brass key in my pocket. I opened the door just a fraction and felt the icy air slide in sharp and sure. One click, no second click. I locked the door again, patted my pocket, and went back downstairs. It wasn't time to leave yet, not quite. But the plan was no longer an idea. It was a certainty, and certainties have a way of warming you even on the coldest nights. The next morning, I woke with the plan in my head as clearly as if it had been laid out in blueprints. I didn't have the luxury of rushing it. One wrong move and it would look like spite instead of self-respect. My goal wasn't to shout "I told you so" from the porch. It was to walk away so completely that they'd feel my absence in the walls. Breakfast was the usual performance. Linda fluttered around the kitchen, getting toast for the kids and fussing over a new batch of cookies for the party. Mark leaned against the counter, phone in one hand, coffee in the other, reciting tasks into some productivity app like he was CEO of the North Pole. "Chief," he said, without looking up, "don't forget, we've got the big dinner with the Wellingtons tonight. Try to be ready by 5, okay?" I stirred my coffee slowly. "5 on the dot," I said. "Wouldn't want to be in the way." Linda gave me a glance, quick and pleading, but didn't say anything. That was becoming her habit. Half apologies in her eyes, silence in her mouth. Around noon, I went to the garage under the pretense of looking for my old snow shovel. In truth, I was studying the rhythm of the household when no one was paying attention. The smart lock on the side door had that same flaw as the front. One click, no second. I tested it gently, pushing until I felt the air slip in, then closing it again. Inside, I checked the thermostat in the hallway. Still locked at 66. I walked by it 3 times that afternoon, noting the faint hum of the furnace and the way the kids kept their blankets wrapped around them like cocoons. Every detail mattered. By mid-afternoon, Linda and Mark had taken the kids out to pick up just a few last things for the party. I had the house to myself. That's when I decided it was time for a practice run. I gathered my coat, the tote with my papers, and the anniversary photo, my gloves, and the brass key. Everything fit easily over my shoulder or in my pockets. I opened the basement door, walked upstairs, and unlocked the front door with the key. The sound was as familiar as my own breath. I stepped outside into the brittle cold. The air bit at my cheeks, but it felt cleaner than the recycled chill of the basement. From here, the house looked almost like it used to, before the renovations and the improvements that had somehow stripped it of its warmth. I walked down the driveway, turned left, and circled the block once. My pace was steady, not hurried, as if I were just out for air. This was important. The whole plan relied on normalcy. When I came back, I slipped inside through the side door, testing the smart lock's weakness once more. One click, no second. The draft it allowed in was subtle but insistent, like a whisper you can't quite ignore. I let it happen, closing the door without sealing it entirely. A few hours in the right conditions, and the temperature inside would drop without anyone realizing why, until it was too late to fix. I hung my coat, put my things back in their exact places downstairs, and sat at the folding table with a book I didn't intend to read. My pulse was steady. I wasn't nervous, not about the act itself, anyway. What gnawed at me was the weight of the choice. Once I walked out for real, there'd be no going back. By the time Linda and Mark returned, the house was already cooler than usual. "Feels drafty in here," Linda said, glancing at the thermostat. Mark shrugged. "It's just the wind. This place has been standing for decades. It can handle a breeze." I smiled to myself, unseen. Yes, I thought. It can handle a breeze, but can you? That night, I lay in bed, listening to the wind hum through the lock. I imagined the party 2 nights from now, the guests in their coats, their breath misting in the perfect 66-degree air, Mark trying to spin it as cozy. I imagined them wondering why the old man wasn't there. When the time came, I wouldn't be slamming the door. I'd be letting it click just once and walking away, quiet as snowfall. 2 days before Christmas, the house shifted into what Linda called full party mode. To me, it felt more like a military operation, every move scheduled, every space assigned a purpose, every person given a role whether they wanted it or not. I'd been through plenty of holiday preparations in my time, but Martha and I had always made them feel like an invitation, not an order. She'd hum carols while she baked pies, send me out for an extra bag of sugar even if we didn't need it, just so I could stretch my legs and talk to the neighbors. Her way of preparing for a party was about making the home warmer, not running it like a hotel. Here, in Linda and Mark's version, warmth was a prop, something you created with lights, scents, and music, but not with temperature or welcome. From my post in the basement, I could hear the flurry above me, chairs scraping, doors opening and shutting, the vacuum whining across the floors. Every now and then someone would shout down the stairs, "Dad, can you grab something from the storage closet?" Or, "Chief, could you take these boxes out to the garage?" I'd do it, of course. Partly because I was still playing along, and partly because each errand gave me another chance to check my escape routes. The front door, still the one click, no second. The side door, same story. The garage entry, surprisingly worse. The rubber seal had worn away in one corner, and I could feel the cold snake in like water through a crack. Mark was oblivious. His focus was on optics, as he called them. "We'll have the mantle lit just right," he said at lunch, scrolling through a party planning app. The village in the center, stockings to the side, tree lights on a timer for the grand reveal, and the thermostat. I asked, watching him over my coffee cup. He grinned. 66, locked in, can't risk the guests feeling stuffy. "Of course not," I said. Nothing says Christmas like frozen fingers. Linda gave me another of her silent warnings with her eyes. She'd stopped trying to bridge the gap between us. Maybe because she'd chosen her side, or maybe because she was too tired to try. Either way, the distance was now part of the house, like the cold draft I'd been tracking. That afternoon, while they were out picking up catering trays, I took my practice run one step further. I loaded my tote with everything for real this time: coat, scarf, gloves, deed, photo, documents, key. I placed the tote in the trunk of my car, parked it a block away on the side street, and walked back through the side door without latching it fully. The basement felt even colder when I came back down, but it wasn't the draft this time. It was the knowledge that my exit was now prepared to the last detail. I could leave at a moment's notice, and no one would realize until they were looking for me to stand in some family photo I never wanted to be in. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind. I thought of Martha, the way she'd make the house smell of cinnamon and pine, the way she'd take my hand when we stood by the window watching the snow. She would have hated the distance in this house now, the way the holidays had become a show instead of a gathering. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Leaving quietly wasn't just about reclaiming my dignity. It was about taking with me the last trace of what this house used to mean, before it became a stage set for someone else's performance. Tomorrow would be Christmas Eve. The guests would arrive, the photos would be staged, and Mark would beam like a man who thought he had everything under control. He wouldn't know until later that the one thing missing would be the warmth in the house and in the family. And I would be long gone before the chill set in for good. The morning of Christmas Eve came with a sky the color of old pewter and an air that seemed to hold its breath, as though it too was waiting for the evening's events. From my narrow basement window, I could see the skeletal branches of the maple tree swaying slowly, the kind of movement that hints at a wind you'll feel more sharply after dark. Upstairs, the household was already in high gear. I could hear Mark's voice booming like a cruise director's as he barked out instructions. "Linda, make sure the buffet table is set up before 4, and the wine delivery, it has to be here before the Wellingtons arrive." No exceptions. The kids were running back and forth, their excitement loud enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall. Normally, I'd smile at that kind of energy, but today it just underlined the contrast between the joy of youth and the chill in the air, both literal and otherwise. I came upstairs around mid-morning under the guise of making coffee, but what I was really doing was observing. The thermostat, locked at 66 as always, glowed faintly on the wall. The front door's latch still gave that single solitary click. And the draft from the garage door was stronger now, the wind having shifted from the north. Linda spotted me lingering near the door. "Dad, if you're cold, there are extra blankets downstairs," she said, not unkindly, but in that tone people use when they've stopped thinking about the bigger picture. I gave her a small smile. "I'm fine," I said, pouring my coffee. "Just getting the lay of the land." By early afternoon, the house was dressed to impress. Every light was perfectly placed, every decoration arranged for maximum effect. The Christmas village on the mantel glowed like a miniature city under glass. Bowls of spiced nuts and trays of cookies lined the counters. Scented candles burned in every room, pumping out pine and cinnamon, whether the room needed it or not. But beneath all that sparkle, the cold was still creeping in. A silent guest no one had invited, yet no one noticed. At 4 o'clock sharp, the first guests arrived, stomping snow from their boots and pulling off their gloves. Mark greeted them with his best politician's smile, ushering them toward the buffet. The chatter swelled, glasses clinked, Laughter spilled through the rooms. I stayed on the periphery, talking with a couple of old neighbors who still remembered when this house had been mine. They asked polite questions about how I was doing, if I was enjoying retirement, if I liked having the kids around. I gave polite answers, the kind that sound complete until you notice how little they actually reveal. By 6, the house was packed. The air should have been warm from all the bodies, but the draft was doing its work. A few guests commented on the crisp feel in the room, and Mark laughed it off, saying, "Keeps everyone awake." I excused myself, slipping away to the coat closet under the pretense of fetching something. In reality, I was retrieving my own coat, the heavy one Martha had given me years ago, and sliding the tote with my essentials over my shoulder. Through the hum of conversation, I moved toward the side door. I eased it open, just enough to feel the icy air rush in, then closed it to that perfect single click. The floor in the lock held true. The cold would seep in all night, slow and steady. I didn't slam the door. I didn't call for attention. I simply stepped out into the night, my boots crunching on the snow as I walked toward the car parked a block away. The wind cut across my face, but it felt cleaner than the air inside. From the sidewalk, I glanced back at the house one last time. The windows glowed with light, the laughter spilling into the dark. But I knew that by morning, that glow would feel different, colder, sharper, emptier. They'd wake up to a house that looked perfect in pictures, but felt like an icebox. And maybe, just maybe, they'd wonder why the old man wasn't there to feel it with them. The sun on Christmas morning was a pale, reluctant thing, filtering through thin clouds that made the world look bleached and tired. I'd woken early in the small motel room I'd checked into after leaving the night before, a no-frills place with a coffee maker that wheezed more than it brewed, and a window that overlooked the silent parking lot. From that window, I could see the world in stillness. A few cars sat crusted with snow, their windshields catching the dim light. Somewhere in the building, someone's TV played faint holiday music, the cheerful jingles feeling oddly out of place against the chill I could feel in my bones. But this wasn't the kind of cold that crept in from a draft. This was the honest cold of winter, the kind you prepare for and respect. I sat at the small desk, sipping bitter coffee, and imagined the scene back at the house. I pictured Linda waking first, padding into the kitchen in her slippers, pulling her sweater tight against her body. She'd notice it immediately, the way the air bit at her skin. She'd glance at the thermostat, still locked at 66, and frown at the number like it had betrayed her. Mark would wake soon after, grumbling about how he must have caught a chill last night. He'd tap the thermostat screen, find it working perfectly, and look around for someone to blame. There'd be no obvious culprit, just the subtle invasion of cold that had seeped in all night through that imperfect latch. The kids would come downstairs, still excited for Christmas morning, but wrapped in their blankets like they'd learned to during the week. They'd open gifts quickly, less eager to linger in the chill. The smell of cinnamon rolls from the oven would mingle with the scent of cold air, that faint metallic tang you can't fake with candles. And somewhere, maybe over coffee, maybe while unwrapping a gift, Linda would realize I wasn't there. She'd check the basement guest area, find the blankets folded neatly, the few belongings gone. She'd probably call my phone. That's when I glanced at it, sitting on the desk beside my coffee cup, powered off since the night before. I wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. Instead, I pulled the anniversary photo of Martha and me from the tote. I set it on the desk, letting the morning light catch her smile. She had a way of looking at the camera, like she could see the person behind it, and in that moment, I felt like she was looking straight at me, telling me I'd done the right thing. I thought about all the years we'd spent making that house a home, all the winters we'd filled with warmth, not because of the furnace, but because of the way we cared for one another. And I realized that's what had been missing this year, not the heat, but the heart. By mid-morning, the motel phone rang. I ignored it. 10 minutes later, my cell phone, now powered on, began buzzing. Missed call after missed call, each one from Linda. I let them stack up. At noon I finally answered, my voice calm. "Dad, where are you? The house is freezing. We've been looking everywhere." "I'm fine," I said simply. "Just somewhere warm." "What happened last night? Did you leave because of—" She stopped herself, maybe realizing she didn't want to hear the answer. "I left," I said, "because it wasn't my home anymore." "You made that clear." There was silence on the other end. Not the kind of silence that comes from not hearing, but the kind that comes from having nothing to say. "Come back," she said finally, her voice softer now. "We can talk about this, I think," I replied. "You'll have plenty to talk about without me there." I hung up gently, no anger in my chest, just a calm certainty. I knew I wouldn't be going back. Not to live anyway. That night, as I sat in the quiet of the motel room with Martha's photo propped against the lamp, I thought about the future. The house could keep its perfect decorations, its locked thermostat, its cold hospitality. I had something far better, the freedom to take my warmth and her memory somewhere it would be valued. The morning after Christmas, the motel lobby was quiet except for the hum of the vending machine and the soft shuffle of the desk clerk's slippers as she walked behind the counter. I poured myself a cup of the coffee they kept in a silver urn and took a seat in the corner booth, the one near the window where you could watch the frost slowly retreat under the pale winter sun. I'd already decided I wasn't going back to the house. The call from Linda the day before had settled that. But just leaving wasn't enough. Not when the real insult had been deeper than the cold draft or the basement exile. It was the way they'd treated me like a prop in their holiday pageant, the assumption that I would always be there, quietly filling a chair in the background, grateful for whatever scraps of dignity they allowed. No, I wanted them to feel something more lasting. Something that would echo after the chill in their bones had faded, and I had just the way to do it. I finished my coffee, went back to my room, and opened the folder I'd carried in my tote. Inside was the deed to the house. My house. The one Martha and I had bought outright decades ago, the one I had signed over to Linda in a joint arrangement years back with the agreement that I could live there as long as I wanted. That agreement had been more than legal, it had been moral. But here's the thing about agreements: when one party breaks the spirit of it, the other isn't obliged to keep pretending it's intact. I called my attorney, a steady-handed man named Howard, who'd been handling my affairs since before Linda was married. His voice on the other end was warm, professional, and just a little curious when I told him what I needed. "Howard," I said, "I want to exercise the clause we put in when we added Linda to the title." There was a pause. "You're sure, Harold, that will remove her name entirely?" "I'm sure," I said, "and I want it done before the year ends." He cleared his throat. "I can have the paperwork ready today. You'll need to come in and sign, of course. I'll also need to file notice with the county." "Good," I said. "Do it. And Howard, make sure the notice is mailed to their address." By noon I was in his office, the deed spread out on the polished desk, my pen steady as I signed. Howard slid the papers into a manila envelope and gave me a thin smile. "This will get their attention," he said. "That's the idea," I replied. Driving back to the motel, I pictured the scene: Mark picking up the mail, flipping through the holiday cards, then stopping at the envelope from the county recorder's office. The way his face would change as he read the words confirming the transfer of ownership that no longer included his wife's name. It wasn't about evicting them or selling the house. It was about sending a message, one that couldn't be misunderstood. This is still mine, and you don't get to push me into a corner in my own home. That evening, I turned on my phone to find more missed calls. Linda's, Mark's, even one from their neighbor, probably sent to smooth things over. I ignored them all. The motel room was warm, my dinner was simple but satisfying, and the quiet was mine. Some people think revenge has to be loud, that it has to come with a confrontation or a dramatic reveal. But I'd learned over the years that the most effective kind was the kind that left the other person sitting in silence, realizing they'd done it to themselves. By the time New Year's came around, the paperwork would be complete, the message would have landed, and I'd be moving on to a place where my presence wasn't treated like a seasonal inconvenience. And in that quiet little motel, sipping my evening tea, I found myself smiling for the first time in weeks. The kind of smile Martha would have recognized, the one that meant I'd set things right in my own way. It was 2 days after I'd signed the papers when the call finally came through, not another rushed, frantic barrage of missed calls, but a single ring that I decided to answer. I'd been expecting it in truth. The county clerk had confirmed that the official notice had been mailed, and I knew it would land in their mailbox like a stone dropped into still water. I was sitting at the small desk in my motel room, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, when the phone lit up with Linda's name. I let it ring twice before I picked it up. "Dad," she said, her voice tight but controlled, like she'd been rehearsing. We got something in the mail today." "I imagine you did," I said, taking a slow sip. "You took my name off the deed." "It wasn't your name to keep," I replied, not unkindly. "Not after the way things went this Christmas." There was a pause long enough for me to hear her breathing. "You didn't have to do this," she said finally. "We could have talked. We had plenty of chances to talk." "Linda," I said, "but you weren't listening. Not when you moved me into the basement. Not when you locked the thermostat. Not when you boxed up your mother's photo to make room for decorations. You made it clear I wasn't part of your home anymore, just a guest you tolerated." Her breath caught, and I knew I'd hit something raw. "It wasn't like that," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe you didn't mean it that way," I said. "But intentions don't keep a man warm in winter. Actions do. And your actions told me everything I needed to know." I could hear voices in the background, Mark's low, urgent tone, the kids chattering, the sound of someone moving around the kitchen. Linda must have stepped into another room, because the noise faded as she said, "The house feels different without you." "That's because I took the warmth with me," I said quietly, "and not the kind that comes from a furnace." She was silent again, and when she spoke, her voice had softened. "Dad, I don't want it to be like this. Can we fix it?" I leaned back in the chair, staring at the framed photo of Martha I'd set beside the lamp. "That depends," I said. "Fixing something means admitting it's broken. Are you ready to do that?" "I am," she said quickly, but then faltered. I don't know how to start." "You start," I said, "by remembering that a family is made of more than decorations and parties. You start by treating the people in it like they matter, even when they're inconvenient." I could almost hear her nodding. "Will you come back?" I took a deep breath. "Not right now. I need some time, and you need to think about why I left in the first place. When you've done that, really done it, then we can talk about the next step." There was a quiet sniffle on the other end, and for a moment she sounded like the little girl who used to stand on a chair beside me while I mixed pancake batter on Sunday mornings. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll call when I'm ready." We said our goodbyes, and I ended the call. I didn't feel triumphant. Revenge, when it's done right, doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's just the steady knowledge that the balance has been restored, that the people who pushed you aside now have to reckon with what they've lost. I turned off the phone and looked out the window at the snow drifting down. The motel parking lot was quiet, the air sharp and clean. Somewhere down the road, my house, my real home, stood in silence, its perfect decorations hiding the emptiness inside. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was the one missing out. The days after Linda's call stretched out like the snow-covered roads outside, quiet, reflective, and filled with choices that needed making. The motel had been a good place to gather myself, but it was never meant to be a permanent home. I'd lived in temporary spaces before, during my service years, during a long job in a city far from where I'd grown up, but this was different. This time, I wasn't just waiting for orders or an end date, I was deciding what came next. I took my time each morning, sitting at the little desk with a notebook and pen, jotting down thoughts not in lists but in sentences, like I was telling my own story to myself. Find a place where the warmth is real. Don't settle for being tolerated. Live where your presence is wanted, not managed. These were more than goals, they were guardrails, reminders of what I would and wouldn't accept. On the third day, I drove out past the edge of town, where the houses gave way to open stretches of land dotted with barns and old oaks. There was a property I'd seen before, a single-story home with a wide porch, set back from the road. The for sale sign had been up for months. I'd ignored it before, thinking it was too far from the conveniences I'd grown used to. Now distance felt like an asset. The real estate agent met me there in a thick coat, her breath rising in white clouds. She walked me through the rooms, each one empty but clean, smelling faintly of cedar from the wood paneling. The living room had a fireplace, a real one, not gas, and the windows looked out onto a view of snow-covered fields that stretched to the horizon. "It's quiet here," she said. "That's what I like about it," I replied. By the time I left, I knew I'd make an offer. It wasn't about the size or even the view, it was about the feeling. No one would be moving me to a basement here. No one would lock the thermostat. This would be my space, and every inch of it would answer to me alone. Back at the motel, I called Howard again. "I need you to draw up a purchase agreement," I told him. "Cash offer." I could hear the approval in his voice as he promised to have the paperwork ready by the end of the week. In the meantime, I started packing the few things I had with me into neat piles: the tote, my clothes, Martha's photo, and the box of personal documents. The simplicity of it was refreshing. I'd left behind rooms full of furniture and keepsakes in that house, but I didn't miss them. What I'd kept was enough. Linda called twice more that week. The first time, she didn't mention the house or the deed. She just asked how I was. I kept the conversation polite but short. The second time, she said the kids missed me. That one gave me pause. I told her I'd think about visiting, but only when the time was right. The day I signed the papers for the new place, I drove straight from the attorney's office to the property. The key was cold in my hand as I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The quiet that greeted me wasn't empty. It was peaceful. I set Martha's photo on the mantel above the fireplace and stood there for a long while, letting the room warm around me. I didn't feel like I'd won in some traditional sense. This wasn't about beating Mark or making Linda grovel. This was about reclaiming something they'd thought they could take, my place, my dignity, my right to live on my own terms. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying snow across the fields. Inside, the fire crackled, and for the first time in months, I felt the kind of warmth you can't measure with a thermostat. The first week in the new house passed in a way that felt almost unreal, not because of any grand events, but because of the absence of tension. No footsteps overhead that reminded me I was a guest. No voices telling me where I could sit, when I could turn on the heat, or how I should fit into someone else's version of family. Just the creak of the wooden floors, the hum of the old refrigerator, and the low crackle of the fireplace in the evenings. I hadn't told Linda the address. That wasn't out of malice. It was out of understanding. The space between us needed to stay open for a while, not as a wound, but as a boundary. If she wanted to repair what had broken, it would take more than an apology made under the weight of guilt. It would take a change in the way she saw me. Word about my move traveled faster than I expected. The small-town rumor mill didn't miss much. A neighbor from my old street called to check in and just happened to mention that Mark had been asking if anyone had seen me around. Apparently, the mail from the county recorder had been the talk of their Christmas week. I could picture it. Mark trying to downplay what had happened, Linda keeping quiet, the kids overhearing pieces of conversations they didn't understand. It wasn't the kind of revenge that made headlines. There was no shouting match, no final confrontation over a table of untouched holiday dinner. Instead, it was a quiet rearranging of the order they'd taken for granted. I had stepped out of their shadow, and in doing so, I'd taken something they couldn't replace, my presence, my history in that home, and the assurance that I'd always be there when they called. On New Year's Eve, I sat in my living room with a glass of good bourbon, the kind Martha used to pour for me when we'd watch the ball drop together. Outside, snow fell in soft spirals, settling on the porch railing and the bare branches of the oak tree. The house was warm, not just from the fire, but from the knowledge that every degree of heat was mine to decide. The phone rang a little after 9. Linda again. This time, I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was softer now, almost hesitant. "Dad, the kids really want to see you. Maybe we could come by, just for a visit. I know we have a lot to talk about." I didn't delete the message, but I didn't call back that night either. I'd learned that sometimes the power of silence is stronger than any speech you could give. Let them feel the absence, let them sit in the chill they'd created, both the one in the house and the one in the family. When midnight came, I raised my glass to the photo of Martha on the mantel. "We did it our way," I murmured. "And we're still warm." The crackle of the fire answered me, and in that moment, I knew this was the best revenge of all, not their suffering, but my peace. Not the emptiness I'd left them with, but the fullness I'd reclaimed for myself. In the end, the house I left behind would always be theirs to decorate, to stage, to fill with guests and rules. But the home I carried forward, the one built on respect, warmth and choice, would always be mine. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from.